let's go around and have an update about how the situation is where you're living, the countries. Do you want to start, Mike?
Sure. Well, since we last spoke, I am officially unemployed at this point. We had to make a difficult decision and lay our staff off because we just don't know when it's going to last. We're definitely out of the picture now till at least May 1st in Nova Scotia. They've shut the schools down till at least then. My gut is telling me June. The worst case scenario that I would hate to fear is obviously that we're going to miss it altogether. Cases are increasing, but the reality I think is people are starting to take it a little bit more seriously, and hopefully we can come out the other end. But we're nowhere near the same situation that obviously the US and Spain and Italy and these guys are going through. But that's us.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Brian, what do
you Yeah, same here. Everything's shut down. I think the governing body here for soccer is kind of remaining hopeful that they're going to play some form of a season, whether it's we typically play in the spring, but I think they're holding out until July or August. And right now we're just from a financial perspective, there's some stimulus coming from the government, and there's some forgivable loans as long as we're able to keep people on staff. And I think clubs are still just kind of waiting in the wing. As far as the general population's health, I think the quarantines are getting more and more rigid around us. Our county's implemented those yet, but the county just 5 miles to the south of pretty well locked down. So hopefully it makes an impact.
Okay. Jodi?
Yeah. Do you mind if I invite Isaac? He's just asking me sorry?
Well, he's welcome.
Okay, so I'm just going to send it to him, and maybe he's joining.
What's his email? I can maybe send it him now.
ISAAC.
One second. Okay, say that again.
ISAAC. ISAAC.
Yeah.
Dot.
Yeah.
GUE.
Yeah.
RR. ERO.
Yeah.
At.
Yeah.
FC Barcelona.
Is that .cat?
Yeah, .cat. Exactly.
Yeah, let's have a go.
I just sent him the link anyway, so.
Okay, I've invited him as well.
Okay.
Here we go.
Well, so here in Barcelona, you might be already aware that since thing happened in Italy, we were next, like 2 weeks after. And now it has been already day 18 of quarantine here at home. So I've been at home for 18 days straight. That's never happened to me before. And I'm sure it didn't happen with all the other people that live in Spain, because they're very likely to be on the streets until late, every day. And then suddenly with this lockdown, we had to change a little bit our lifestyles. Now they have extended the period for another 14 days. And well, they're also saying some parts of the government is expecting maybe to extend this until the end of April. In the sports area, or let's talk about like football competitions. Federations are already talking of maybe canceling every activity until next year. They're also working out on some situations in which we can play maybe at the end of May, or maybe extending the competition to July so we can play some games. But yeah, now everything is a little bit of uncertain, and I think that we are just living something unique, or at least I'm living something unique, in which I have to adapt here, lockdown at home, doing our regular stuff, from every day, because I still do sport, I still work. You still have to be in contact with some friends, but we do it in a way different way. And yeah, I think everyone is trying to take the bright side of this, but at the same time, looking forward to this to end and restart our lives again.
Yeah. Marky, what's going on with you?
Yeah, what's going on with you?
Well, I think Sweden is probably heading towards more stricter measures. We've been allowing children to train up this. The children's leagues are supposed to actually start this weekend, but I think that's doubtful. I guess the strategy has been to try and minimize the possibility of overloading the healthcare. It's sort of been working for a while, but I think now it's gone to a stage where I guess they'll probably have to put stricter measures. They've closed down all the ski stuff, the ski resorts up north and everything. So it's starting to happen now, and there's laws about gatherings and indoors, how many people, etc. But I don't think we've gone as far as Canada, USA, or Spain have yet, but it's likely we're going to be heading there.
So did you say that is the soccer still happening?
Yes, for the moment.
Right.
And I think there's a press conference later today, which I assume will probably basically say that we're not starting the season.
Right.
Because I know the seniors aren't allowed play. The first team, they're not playing until June apparently. So our season starts in April. So
will that suspend training then for you as well, or just no games?
No games. I think it'll all be just shut down now this week, personally.
Right. Yeah.
That's what I think. I think it's been delayed now a while. They've managed to slow it, but I think it's got to a situation now where they'll have to probably just start heading towards a quarantine, to more quarantine measures, I guess.
Yeah. You've apparently depressed Jodi's left.
Yeah.
No,
There it is.
you kicked me out.
Yeah, it's strange times, worrying times. You know, I was saying to someone the other day, and I don't know, Mark, really what you're just touching on there. Like, if we're going to get past this, I think we need to go in fully. I mean, I think probably all of us, maybe Spain's a bit further ahead, but we're kind of two-thirds of the way in, and that's not really doing anything. You know, we're trying to keep some normality, but at the same time, it's just getting worse slower. So I just think, you know, maybe that real aggressive Druckerian way of just completely shutting it down is the only way we can get back to some normality at this point.
Yeah, maybe it has to be. I mean, as I said, we're no experts, but it's really just uncharted waters for everyone here.
Yeah.
And it's really just about trying to stay healthy and being careful. You know, you still have to go and buy food. I've got 3 young kids, so I still have to look after them in some way. So yeah, you know. Yeah.
Has Isaac figured out how to get the video on yet?
I think he's listening. I don't know if he because he has some meetings, I think. So I don't know if he's gonna say hi but he was interested. Look, there he is.
Afternoon, Isaac.
Hi guys.
How are you?
How you doing?
Fine. Congratulations for this initiative.
Thank you.
And I have a quick question because I have to leave because I have a meeting now. Is your plans to finish the season in the youth academy to play
Sweden?
games in Sweden and in your country?
That was the plan until today. Last week, the Swedish Federation came out saying that the youth leagues will start next week. But I don't think they're going to. I know there's going to be another press conference today, and I think they'll be cancelled. Personally, I think they will.
And the others, you have the same situation, right? Maybe we will return in September, no?
We haven't started because our season's obviously different to yours. We can't play in the winter at all. So we were supposed to start 2 weeks ago. We haven't, and we will not be starting it till the least May 1st. And my gut tells me it'll be longer than that. And I just hope, I pray that it won't be completely suspended.
Mm-hmm.
But the National Swedish League, the Senior League, is supposed to start in June. I think everything now will be delayed until June. It might be the best for decision.
Okay.
It's hard to know. Okay, should we get to the main point of the discussion?
Yeah, you're keen for this, Mark. Do you want to lead us into it?
Shall I do it? Shall I?
Yeah.
Okay. So briefly we touched on it last week, and that was that I was kind of reflecting over a lot of the coach education I've done, that I've been involved in, and that I've experienced and read up on, because I've been reading on a lot of coach education around the world, and I kind of feel that there is still this culturally dominant pervasive planning paradigm that seems to underpin a lot of the coach education. And what I mean by that is that there's these specific themes, predetermined coaching points. The coach decides the sequence of the individual parts of the session, how long each is. And I'm kind of wondering, I think that this is actually, we really need to be looking for ways in coach education to liberate the coaches from these constraints, because I think it's over constraining coaches learning, I think. For instance, I've experienced when I've been a coach educator, because you have these classic coaching points, that the coaches are looking for the coaching points, not what's actually happening.
Right.
So they're actually coaching around predetermined coaching points. And then also they're really constrained by, this is the way this association says we do. We have to do this at the start, and then this, these sequential. And something might be happening somewhere, but you still have to break your session because you have your plan. So it's this culturally pervasive planning paradigm that I think we need to start questioning and liberate our coaches from, to improve coach development and possibly player development. And I'm just wondering if you guys have any insights on this.
Well, Mark, I mean, I think the first question is, how much, I think your question is how much structure do we go into a session? Because I think that's the guilty thing. We're over structured with what we want to do and what we want to achieve. But there's a level you do need to go in there with at least an idea of maybe what it is you want to achieve from, or what the team wants to achieve from an objective. So how much is too much? Is that kind of the question really you're asking?
Yeah, well, it's so predetermined, the planning, it's a very old planning paradigm. And I'm just wondering, why do we still use it? And is this constraining the learning? Is it actually limiting coach development? I mean, having a theme in youth football that you would see here in Sweden be, is dribbling or passing, but you're just giving away the answer at the start, So I'm wondering how we're working and how we're trying to work. We're moved away from themes at AIK, and we're very much based on, all session design is based on principles of play, and we've just narrowed it down to player, opponent, ball, direction, consequence, everyone involved.
Gents, what's our thoughts?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of these conversations actually with Isaac or with my other colleagues, and I think that's one of the main areas of interest that I have. Like watching the coach, if we're talking about coach development, not going to the session on how is he doing the session, because at the very end, if we see how the coach is doing the session, it's just basically an emergent behavior of all the influence of context, of culture, of society, that ends up in me doing this as a coach, right? So I think that we have to go a bit further up and understand how is the role of the coach perceived and why the role of the coach is perceived that way in this very context. So, for example, I think that you mentioned this, but probably most of the coaches have an intention of, I'm going to the session to train solutions, right? So if I consider my role to train solutions, fill everyone's back with solutions, then probably the rest of the approach of that coach towards the session plan, towards the design, towards the timing, towards his interventions are going to be related to that intention of I am the provider of solutions. If we understand that coaches have a bigger impact in society or have a bigger impact in the development of the child, and that there's nothing measurable in front of you, which right now their measure is what happens in the weekend, or if that behavior that I was meant to train happens or not. But if we convince them, or if we create a system, or we develop a context in which they see that the actual impact is happening in 5-year times, in 10-year times, or in even longer, or forever, I think that might change the mentality of the coach, and then be able to attune himself to new possibilities within that session. So basically what I'm saying is that session is just the expression of the coach on what he thinks his role is, and that if we change that lenses from which he watches the session or his very own role, I think we can change many of those things.
I would even go further, Jodi, and say that it's not just about a coach turning up saying that I'm going to give the solutions. I'm going to limit all errors.
The errors, you mean?
Yeah, that the coach turns up and wants to limit errors, as opposed to not understanding that the variability in errors sometimes leads to great learning.
Well, yeah, from my point of view, the first thing is I hesitate. I mean, I'm skeptical that there's such thing as errors, in a game like this. That will be my first point. Like, I don't know how you dare to consider something as an error or not when it's something so complex.
But that's what the coach is bringing, is going in with that mentality.
Yeah, I understand.
So it's like the example I would give is that it's kind of become very trendy now in Sweden that everyone speaks about a game model. And we see these propping up in different forms. So with 8 and 9-year-olds, where we have coaches explicitly telling kids during training where to pass the ball and who to pass it to. So they all have these predetermined patterns that they're supposed to regurgitate in the match. And then it looks great, of course, because, but there is no learning and there's no decision making. It's just like these young children are just pawns. And that's a form of a game model being a global to local imposed game model that I see happening now in a lot of youth football, and that's of course again to limit errors. And it's a real coach-centered thing, but it's another problem within all this planning paradigm, I think, that we have.
Yeah.
I mean, would you say then in your countries, obviously this has got historical context to it, these things. Is it quite prevalent in your countries as well, like this notion of this is a coach versus this is not a coach? Because I definitely in Canada there's a fear, and our model is very different. Is a very high pay to play model. The parents have this understanding of what they believe coaching is, and therefore you feel like the coaches are trying to actually service the parent and not do what's the best interest, and that's the child development. Is that something that you guys see as well then?
We definitely see that. Probably similar from a cultural perspective, Mike. For us, it is a pay to play model. So parents do form some expectations there, and I think they pick up on the over passive coach. The one that's, and they recognize that as something that the coach isn't doing anything. That said, I do believe that coaches identify themselves as providers of solutions, but it's taken a lot of outreach and a lot of education and a lot of interaction with people like yourself, just for me to arrive at an understanding of the bigger picture, longer term picture, and an understanding that these unless we allow these players to, the behaviors to emerge, because we can't see the future. So we make assumptions about what value we can add by, teaching a kid how to kick the ball, because we don't know what's coming down the pipeline without quite a bit of experience and perspective.
So Mark,
I think in this kind of chats, we have to invite some guy from the other side, from the dark side, you know, because maybe all of us we are very agree. And sorry, because for me it's very complicated to speak English without touching, but I totally agree. And I think maybe we have, or we agree that we have 20 game models in each team. Depends the player, because for all of us, I think so. The most important thing is that we have to observe the naturalized behavior of the players, and also each of us in each club we have our idea that we try to share. Jordi, I don't know which is the word to say impregnar.
Well, to engrave or to implement or what?
Yeah, it's a level, a lower level than implement. To constrain, maybe it's like to constrain through our kind of procedures that we are using. In our case, we are speaking about some creator elements, some space and time criteria.
It's done.
we lost him.
And we are all very open to observe the natural behavior of the player. If we are very focused in a game model, we are also very focused in pre-established models of the player. You said, Braden, the example of we have to teach the player how to kick. It doesn't make sense, no? And in this sense, maybe one day we can open the discussion about this external or internal focus. And I think it's very interesting, this topic.
I think you both of you, Isaac and Jodi, when you say then what is the question really is, so what is the nature of the player? And what I'm seeing a lot now in youth football is that young children are being taught a model of the game as opposed to the game. They're learning a model as opposed to learning the game. And how they learn the game really is very much got to do with their individual constraints, their very nature of who they are, as you say. And I think this is kind of interesting because this leads it to the kind of where I'm trying to push things when I'm working with coaches, is that coaches should see themselves more as designers, meaning that the training you design or the session design that you have, that's actually where the first feedback comes from, not from the coach. It comes from the session design and how the players act on how they're perceiving the information in the session design. That's what you coach around. So it's, I guess, design around principles of play, and we call it coaching around affordances. And I think it'd be really good if coach education went towards seeing coaches more as designers and coaches understanding that it's how players act on information in the design is what I coach around, if you understand.
And this is very interesting because also even with the feedback, maybe we have to be, again, we have to progress in this battle against our status quo, and we have to change this, of course. And maybe the feedback, for example, when we have the needs, sometimes we are thinking that we are very open and we are very modern in our exchange with the player. And in this sense, maybe we are designing context to create situations. But finally, is the difference that, of course, we overcome this level of coach maker. But now we are inductors because we are creating a context to promote the player will decide the thing that we are expecting that he will decide. We are connecting this intention action in the process, the cycle. The next step will be that we will be facilitators. It's something that we are discussion with John. For this, we have to allow this self-interiorization of the experience from the player, because sometimes we are maybe making a question, but we have to respect the moment of the player that he has to analyze his own feelings and his own emotions about this performance. and this is very complicated. This for us in our group of coaches, that respect that you have to be sitting the bench, you have to respect the first 2, 3, third, 4 action of the player, because you have to give this gap of time to recognize themselves, because it's very dangerous to speak about the mistakes or the actions that are right, because nobody, at least in our sport, it's impossible to define this.
Which is really, it's great you say this, because then this is kind of the very reason why I'm criticizing the idea of having predetermined coaching points, particularly with young children, because the coaches end up just looking for the coaching points as opposed to what's happening in the game, how the players are trying to understand in the game. And this is for me really problematic, and when I see on coach education courses, and I think you really hit the nail on the head there, Isaac, with that.
I mean, Mark, you were in Canada when we were piloting the children's license, and that kind of paradigm slowly starting to happen if people are fortunate enough to go on those courses, where we're talking around the coach is really an architect of the environment versus obviously you know the person who's got all the knowledge and the answers. Are you seeing a shift? You know, obviously in your respective clubs, Mark, with yours, I know a little bit more about. You know, you're obviously facilitating these kind of ideas. Are you starting to see a shift in that, you know, paradigm in your respective clubs?
At my club, yes, it's starting. There are, you know, I think it's only natural for coaches to go back and forward between what they know best and where they're going, because that's part of the learning. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, I guess. Some really good coaches at our club that are working this way. They're extraordinary. But, you know, I think there's a good discussions out there about this at the moment. And I think what Isaac is referring to is players learning to self-regulate their behaviors, which is not just actions, but it's also emotions. And I think it's a good discussion that's happening out there now, I think it's really starting to surface, and some of the literature in my PhD work, what I'm working on with Keith and Martin Rothwell, and we have a few others, Carl Woods in Port Adelaide in Australia with Australian rules. This is a real big discussion at the moment in our field. What about you guys?
Let me ask you this quickly, though, Mark. Is that in your respective club, or is that your federation, your governing body?
No,
is it
just my respective club, just our club.
Right.
But it's starting. Other clubs are starting to look into this and discuss it with us. And then, as I said, Carl in Adelaide is doing an amazing work around similar ideas in a top professional Australian rules club. So it is out there. It's a lot of the new research that we're working on is pushing these questions a bit.
Right.
And, you know, we're only investigating them. We don't have answers, but we're only investigating them. We're trying to say, okay, where can this go? Where can we take it? What do you guys think? Have you any?
So with the United States, I've actually been impressed with the direction that they're starting to go. Mike, you guys might be the same in Canada, and I'm really curious to know what they're doing, you know, at Barcelona. But an introductory coaching course, we call it the grassroots course. They go through a model where the kids play, you know, small side, you know, 2v2, and then, you know, they work on an area of the field, and then they go back into as big of a game as they can make, given the number of players that they have, 77. But the thing we're asking is to watch the environment, and you have kind of 4 questions that you're constantly asking yourself, and that is, you know, is it organized? One, the way that I want it. Is it game-like? The way that I want it. Does it offer enough repetition of situations? We're not talking touches, situations. And is it challenging? So challenging for everybody. So they're kind of asking them to affect or to identify the challenge point, and then there's coaching. So design first, coaching last. And, you know, to our previous point, the introductory coach that may have some coaching experience, I think, is looking in that model and saying, well, what's my role exactly? Because it's more or less taken care of by the game. What is the message being sent to coaches in your environments?
So,
Yeah, well, I was actually going to ask you a question related to this, and is it like, I don't know if you see, well, it's a question that I'm going to answer myself, no, but like, don't you see that thing that coaches are doing towards players is more or less what governing bodies of sport or federations or coach education institutions are doing with the coaches? So again, like referring to what Isaac was saying, I think that it all comes with the culture of certainty and needing control. And now, for example, we can talk about a new methodology in which we are talking about active pedagogy, or we are talking about autonomy for the player, or we're talking about that coach that designs and not intervenes. But if we still use these words as the way I'm saying it, the coach should be this, I think it's going to be still the same. We're going to influence the coach to do different behaviors because the macro system is telling you the right coaches to do this, the way that the player learns is this way, but we are forgetting that what we have to allow the coach is feel free, and is to feel how the context is talking to him and how do I interact with these coaches. I always say, no, when we're in an academy in which everything is pre-established, doesn't matter if the methodology is A or the methodology is B. But what it's clear is that the lenses of the coach is very related to what this methodology is telling you. You know, like you're relating your behaviors to a framework that a team or a club or a federation tells you to do. Whereas when you're a little bit lost in the jungle, when you're a little bit coaching, sorry, but when you're coaching in an environment where it's you, the players, and the context, then you become that coach that gets to be attuned to the opportunities that the context give you, right? So when do we consider that you are doing a good coaching or a bad coaching? Is it a pre-established model that differs from what we have been doing till now? So now is this the right way of coaching? Or is it actually just coaching, having some information that helps you reflect on, oh, I'm in the right path, or I could change these things, but being very focused to the context? So what is what is the context asking you to do? You know, then you have the players. Yeah.
It's funny you say that, and I think Mark witnessed this as well, and I've continued to witness this as a coach educator in Canada. The coaches are also, as you say, they are kind of designed. They want answers. They want to know when it's their turn to go on the field with the set of players. What are you wanting me to do? What boxes do I need to tick?
Exactly.
And it's been really difficult to get them to go out there and just, as you say, be themselves, be attuned to what they're feeling and seeing, because they literally have been through that system, and it's got a blueprint now on them. They've got an experience with that blueprint, and they can't shake it. So it's funny when we're interacting with them in that coach education environment, they look very bemused and unsettled when we say, we're not asking you to do it anyway. Just these are the principles of your session. You know, you may have a bias towards a certain, interaction on the field, but do what you need to do, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. Exactly. And that has been so unsettling for people. Unsettling.
Totally, because again, like that will be an approach of avoiding the error, no? Like what Mark was saying, like we all try to keep certainty, to avoid the error, to do the right thing, and we are never patient enough to say, let's things happen, or let's messed up things happen. And from that point, we have an opportunity to see and to analyze and to reflect, because this is a long way for the coaches, for the players. Like, I don't think the coaches are just in service of the players. I think that the coaches are also human beings that are learning, that are doing something that they enjoy, and that they're also part of this game. And obviously, they have to understand that the player is playing, but we also have to have respect for the coach that is doing this passionately, that is also learning, that is also developing, and that putting his service to this community. So I think that we need approaches on both directions, or in both levels, in which we allow things happen, and we are able to act on what is in front of us and not on what is pre-established or what do we think that is right or wrong.
That's really brilliant. Can you still hear me? Because my screen has gone a bit blank here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really brilliant, Jodi. I think that you're kind of really, I like the way you're quite like how we do at AIK, reflecting on the different levels of constraints over different time scales, the macro all the way down into the micro. And I think the social cultural constraints as well that are on coaches, their past. We know that even skills, coaching skills and individual player skills have a history of opportunities and experience offered to them up to that point when they turn up at our training, both coaches and players. And I think a good thing is that from here is that when we speak about patience, and if patience is so important, then maybe one of the ways to move away from this culturally pervasive planning paradigm is the real promotion of observation and reflection for coaches in training. So coaches are designers. The main job is to observe and reflect, and then actually reflect together with the players. So that's your planning is almost done while you're observing and reflecting. You understand what I mean? But that kind of tunes you into the next session where it needs to go.
Mm.
If you have anything around that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. I guess for anyone who watches this, they're probably going to be asking the question, because I know they will be, is, okay, so how would one implement, and start the culture process of maybe changing this paradigm within their organization or within their club? And I mean, I know, Mark, it's been a process that you're still in, and the journey, there's no destination. It's always going to be a journey that's, ever going, because you're going to have new coaches in. So what's the steps do you think you need to take? I mean, I know you've mentioned, it's around the design. It's about being an architect of the environment, not really doing it with the context of, designing solutions, but more so designing around principles. Have you got any kind of tips as leaders that you can start to have these conversations and actually start this shift in your organization and club?
Is this directed at me? Or
Anyone.
Okay.
Yeah,
Somebody else. Was it you, Jodi? Do you want to say something?
I think sure thing. I think, of course, it's very important that we will be good context designers to promote the emergence of whatever behaviors, because we are not. We have to avoid to expect any kind of behavior, because with this we are offering this full experience for the player. But also it will be very important, I think so, to change with the coaches different experience in terms of observation. Maybe it will be more important to know to have more background in terms of non-verbal communication than in terms of the specific coordination key points of the coordinative action of the kick, the ball, whatever. Maybe it will be. The other day with Jodi, we were speaking with we had in La Masia. I don't know if you know Angel Capa. Angel Capa was the assistant coach of Valdano, Menotti, and also was a head coach. And we are remembering a famous sentence of Menotti that Jodi, you remember that is one of our favorite sentence. I will try to say in English. It's more or less that if you only know about football, neither you know about football. More or less, Jodi, you can translate.
It's gonna be tough. No, basically, it's saying that those who only know about football doesn't even know about football.
Exactly. For example, you can imagine one of the last. Of course, we have ordinary training courses with our coaches, and we're speaking about the idea, the knowledge, the basic knowledge that belongs to our idea. But other day, for example, we invite an expert in cancer, and because we were very, very curious about the organization of this sickness, and maybe Jodi, we learn more in this class than another class with a famous coaches that will arrive with a perfect game model with a lot of draws, a lot of pictures.
Yeah.
The observation, for me, is the key.
Brilliant. I think I did some work with you, Mike, and with Jason at the Canadian Soccer Association, helping me with the coach education and helping develop whatever, if we want to call it a curriculum, the children's license. And one of the first things I remember saying to Jason was, through the literature, they had the word coaching as in the form teaching, and I said let's only speak about learning instead. And the reason being because it was such a dominant top-down coach culture that let's speak about learning. So change the conversation from coaching, teaching to learning, even though they're very similar things, but they were very definite separate things within the culture of Canada at the time. So I remember when the first time I went over and I met up with you, Mike, we only spoke about learning at the first meeting in Toronto. That was very much at it, if you remember that.
Yeah, no, I totally do. Yeah, I mean, the whole process in coach education, Mark, is completely shifted since that initial meeting, and I think having this conversation on the process of learning and what learning is, and as you say, trying to change that hierarchical interaction between coach and player has changed. Yeah.
So the idea of, if you want to change a culture, maybe you need to also change the language, how we speak to each other. So I know Dennis Hortin and I, when we started at AIK, when AIK started changing how it works structurally and pedagogically, we went into some of the available literature online that the club was using, and we removed with young kids, we removed the word product, we removed the word elite. So we don't speak about these things anymore. We don't see children as a product of our club. They're not. We help foster good individuals and players, and we don't see children as elite footballers. So I think, and then what we did is we started a research and development department, and we actually investigated our own culture, really thoroughly investigated, James Vaughan and myself, including Dennis, and with the help of coaches, with the help of even people working in administration, we did a big investigation of our own culture, and it's what's coming from that, emerging from that is some of the stuff, of course, I'm speaking about today, about the planning, the culturally planning paradigms and things. But I think that's really investigate your own culture, and maybe you might have to change a few words and change how you speak to each other. I think, because some words are loaded. They're really, the word talent is so loaded as well.
Words matter. No language.
Yes.
Isaac.
It's a work, attack. Always, Paco Cirulo say to us that, of course, the terminology, the vocabulary will create your brain. And if you are speaking about, you are transforming in things the players, and maybe the people don't realize the level of importance of these things. Maybe we are speaking about teaching, and in fact we have to speak about changing to change information. And for me, for us is and also Jodi can explain more about it. We are very, very on top to promote this change, and we are achieving in our club to change this way to communicate, because it's very important.
Isaac, can I ask you a question? I have a feeling we do something very similar in AIK and Barcelona, is that we don't really use the word action, we use interaction when we're speaking about football. We don't speak about football action, we speak about football interactions.
And also it's very important. Also, Jodi and me, I will say now, we learn now. We exchange with Paco about it, because also the action is something that is isolated. It's not relative to this continuum of the game. And when you are doing interactions, also you are doing something because your teammates and the opponents and the environment.
Exactly. And those interactions are also framed by culture.
Yeah. And on that, what Isaac was saying, I was basically going to mention that, right? Like even learning, like how pretentious it is that I think that I'm doing something as a coach that makes him learn, no? And I normally own that process, even if I do it in one way or another, right? Like it's like a word that belongs to he's learning because of this. So what we have to assume is that any person learns you like it or not, right? That's why I like the word exchange, because at the very end, what is the role of the coach, or what is the coach doing? He's optimizing someone else, he's optimizing his players, but through his own optimization. Because if you don't get better as a coach, because you're part of the environment and you're not co-adapting to all the interactions and to all the things that are happening, you're not gonna create the chance for the others to get even better. However, learning, it's something that will happen. Like if you're doing something that is totally opposed to what you think that is a good learning environment, I'm sure that learning still happens, because you don't know what you're going to learn, but learning is an active process that happens endlessly, right?
Yeah, and it happens in development.
Exactly,
it happens in development.
Exactly.
So over different time scales.
Yeah, and that's why I think that when Mike was asking about what strategies do we use in clubs and how do we approach this way of thinking, how do we convince the coaches, right? I think terminology is one of the things, but not using it as a in a superficial way or in a forceful way, like saying, hey, this is how we have to say things, but step by step in the design of your documents, in the design of your guidelines, in the way you write things, in the conversations that you're having with your coaches, suddenly, step by step, you are making them, turn their lenses towards other things. You will help them to see new things. You will make them observe other things, and terminology will be one of the keys. But there's more strategies. I'm sure that, well, Isaac has a lot of ideas, but within the team, we're already talking about, okay, what is it like that coaches stop thinking that they are coaching their team, but they are coaching in a club, right? So what about changing coaches from one team to the other depending on the week? What do we think about doing 2 months one team, 2 months another team, and we have this variability for the coach, for the players, but at the same time for the coaches? I don't feel that I'm owning any of these teams. I don't feel that my objective is to win this league at the very end of the season. I'm just giving my best service to this club, right? Those are little things that we can change in an environment, in the environment, that makes the coach look at other stuff. Like, for example, if you ask them for game reports in which you analyze tactically what happened, and instead and if you instead ask him to give a report of players looking individually on how does he manifests his behaviors during games, that's a totally different coach, because the first coach will be looking at patterns, at collective play, and the second coach will be looking at little details or little behaviors that the players are doing. So it's very important that every action that we do, the session plan, the words in the session plan, the guidelines, that has a message. That's like the constraints that we are making the coach look at one thing or the other. And I think that's where we have the most power as in positions that we have to cater for a lot of coaches, right? And finally, having said that, like, look, when we talk about global and local, we can look at it from a global game model, local player interactions. But if we think about it in a broader scale, like global is all those things that are in the context that probably we cannot control sometimes. Like, for example, if I'm a coach or if I'm a club, I cannot control what is the context of the competition. How does the competition values if you're doing it right or wrong? Because if there's promotion relegation, it's one thing. If they're saying that there's no promotion, another thing. If the families or the parents are moving to those teams that are winning, or if the families like to stay more closer to home, all those things are not controllable, and it's part of the global. But the coach has the privilege, or I think that they're in a privileged position. And again, like, I always like to put the coach in the local interactions as well. Like, he's co-adapting with all these players, but he's in a privileged position to make these interrelations between global and local. So understanding that there's a framework or there's a reference in which our behaviors emerge, but at the same time, I have to be wise enough or smart enough to understand that the local interactions that are happening can change this global scale, in different levels. I think that, of course, yes, that's why the coach should be.
It's bi-directional.
Yeah, and it's bi-directional, but the coach has to be that person, or could be that person that works as a catalyst between these two ends, like these two, to this global and this local.
Brilliant.
Yeah, excellent. So would you say a takeaway then, Jen, is like, if you are a club and you're trying to, structure it to a degree, frameworks are key, principles are key, because they're flexible. This notion of, fixed game models, patterns, we need to get away from that as simple as possible. So, Mark, I know yours is principle led. It's a framework. It's there to really just afford coaches, as you say, the behaviors to maybe bring out what they are seeing, feeling. Would you say that's maybe a big takeaway for people listening?
From my end, I think, we base a lot of our, try to get coaches to base around principles of play. Try and get that the feedback comes from the game designs, observations, reflections, we're trying to do that, but also that we realize that these are social cultural beings as well, working within like we call a form of life that also influences how they act day to day. And and as I said, some coaches will take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, or 1 step forward and 2 steps back, but that's all part of learning.
That's
and
right.
And I think, as Jodi said, it's like us, it's the continuous interactions with coaches. And I think the key word is interactions with young players, how they interact playing football, their football interactions, which are just not only situational or informational, they're also underpinned by social, historically cultural factors, but also interactions between us and our coaches and parents, this whole cultural interaction thing. And I think the more we use, the more we are conscious of the language we're using in these contexts, I think the better it will be. And I think then that will really help how we can evolve a really player environment centered culture.
Yeah. One of the things I've liked today is obviously, Jodi, that whole concept of optimizing versus you're learning anyway, so it's just optimizing all the time. That's a big one for me today. Yeah. Anything else, Jen?
Guys, sorry, I have to leave because I skipped the first meeting because it's very interesting, and the second meeting I have to be. And Jodi, we have to repeat this.
Huh?
Yeah, we do this. We do this in a few weeks again when we're locked in for 20 years.
Every Wednesday.
Okay, guys. Cool. Thank you so much for your invitation, and take care and stay at home.
Yeah, we hope to see you soon.
Come back to the grass. Sorry.
And I hope to see you soon, Isaac.
Sure. Soon we will be meet together in the grass.
Yes.
In our environment.
Exactly.
Hey guys, thank you so much. Bye.
Isaac, thank you.
That's great.
Yeah, guys.
Anything else you want to chat about before we wrap this ramble up?
I think it was really, really valuable. I'm looking at coaches though, and most of our coaches are part-time. Is that the same for you, Mike?
Yeah, I mean the challenge that we'll have with some of this is the fact that some come with no knowledge. So just being able to see and feel, they don't even have that understanding. They can probably feel what the players are feeling, but their knowledge and experience with the game is really tough. So that we have to provide at least some framework, and that's, I think, the key point. It's not fixed; it's just flexible. How you educate, that's going to be tough, Britain. But yeah, I mean, we have some coaches that have a lot of experience that have played at a good level, and then we've had some that have never played before. They're just grassroots coaches. So, it's we as a club, as an organisation, have to be very flexible in our methodology from top to bottom because we've got so many different people involved.
Yeah. I think one of the constraints that we're under is that a lot of our coaches live pretty exhausting lifestyles. Mm-hmm. And, when you get a little bit obtuse like this, they kind of shut down a little bit. And so we're going to have to be careful about how we frame it and, the time that we frame it to make sure that we're not adding too much complexity to their plate and we're actually helping them. So
it's interesting just on that, Britain, when we do the grassroots coaching courses, and Mark, you've mentioned it several times, we just say to them, look, if you don't know, don't try to know, just create the environment, let the kids play, and if at worst case scenario they play for that entire session, you just keep changing the environment on them to kind of self-organize, then guess what? You're coaching. You're just not coaching in the traditional sense that you think coaching is, and you're not going to do any damage. You're going to do more damage by trying to stop the session and give them your information of what you think is right when it might actually be completely wrong. So, you could argue, are we getting coaches that maybe are becoming too passive in the grassroots? Yes, but to be honest, based on where they're coming from, I think it's in the best interest of the kids that they don't. I don't know what your opinion is on that.
No, I think to some extent you're right. And I think it really comes down to how do we help or add value to the reflections and facilitate better questions, better conversations with the coaches. Kind of when they're in that, our coaches, they come into the environment, they do their coaching, and they rush home to get to dinner. So I think as far as the questions that we ask them and kind of leading some of the learning, those are the things that come to mind that are going to be the hard work.
Yeah, we need to find ways to inspire as many coaches as possible. I think at my club, AIK, I've been very impressed with a lot of the parent coaches that I've been working with. Actually, many of them are have really taken on some of the ideas, but again, it's just continuous facilitating opportunities so we can interact and speak and try to inspire them, because you can't tell them what to do. You have to do this because, as you say yourself, they all work full time and they have other things going on. So it's about inspiring, I think. Yeah.
Would you say, Mark, then, would you be in agreement then, as anyone who's doing these kind of grassroots coach education workshops, that's probably the best starting point, is to encourage them not to get involved if they don't feel comfortable, and just create the environment? Because again, I go to a lot of courses and I watch a lot of courses, and I just see that old traditional just coaches trying to speak because they've seen that you must coach these points. Would you say that just change the environment? At the end of the day, if you don't know what you're seeing, just let them be a bit more passive, I guess.
Yeah. I think I liked when I was in Canada when we did the children's license, you, me, and Jason, and I liked how you got them to do the practical sessions where you just gave them principles, very simple ideas, not themes, just to work around and say, okay, work around this, and then evaluate it yourself. And then then your peers, the coaches, will help you evaluate it, and we'll all sit down and have a chat about it and see where we can push it. And I thought that created a very positive learning environment. I think that I was very impressed with that. I think that's could be a step forward for coach education in many countries.
Mm.
Well, in this case, I've been in two different contexts, two different contexts, no? Like 2 years ago when I went to Sydney, I'm in this academy. Coaches are pretty new, are receiving this coach education from us. And it's all orientated to all these things that we're talking about, right? The intervention, if we have to intervene, if we say the responses, if we do guided discovery, etc., etc. A lot of things that we can discuss a bit further down, but we have this context, and now I have this context in which we have top coaches, okay? Like we are talking about coaches with licenses, we are talking about coaches that are watching 200 games every week, that are analyzing their own games, they're analyzing the opponent's game, that they have a conceptual map of all the elements that are having place in each situation, right? So it's totally different. Now, when you go on the field, and you can have these two situations, right? The former case in which you can tell a team is struggling or a player is struggling, or there's something that is telling you that the team is not synchronized or is not coordinated or is not flowing, and how that person, because has been already taught, or he is already aware that anything that he says, it doesn't mean that it's right, and he cannot make these instructions. He just have to let the players discover. But you are clearly not doing your role as a person who assists or optimizes those players in that moment, because I think that that's also important. The coach have to know what are the things that might be making that team struggle or making that player struggle, and how can we give him a piece of advice to change the dynamic. Okay, and that person gets stuck, gets freeze, and I agree with you, Mike. Like, okay, probably the damage is lower because the players are just playing, and I'm not intoxicating or polluting their knowledge or their practice. And then you have, in the other hand, coaches that are really good that has a lot of detail, but they think that they are controlling every single action and every single behavior, what's happening on the field, right? So if you have to stay with one, if you have the chance of educating these two profile of coaches in a good club, which one will you take? Because I see some lags in one and the other.
Yeah. And to be honest, Jodi, that's the toss up that we continually challenge ourselves. I think with us right now, we've gone with they're so young, the kids don't play enough anyway. Let's just create environments and see if they can self-organize, and then over time we just have those interactions with the coach to see if we can give them a little bit of understanding of what they're looking for and what some of the principles that they can maybe attune their players towards. But it's hard. It's not easy because they come with, as you say, experiences and history of maybe being coached a certain way or being in another sport that they've been volunteering in and they've been coaching other. So they come with all this story there, and it's hard for them to shift and shape that. So it's been tough for us in North America. I'm sure Britain, I see you nodding, that's similar in your domain.
Yep.
I'd much rather the coach that lets the kids solve than the coach that's basically belly aching at them and controlling everything that they try and do, because most of the time as well, unfortunately, it's not even right what they're saying.
Yeah, I've seen different extremes as well. Just in our environment, our club, clubs surrounding. You do have this extreme, let the kids solve, and then the kids don't end up really doing anything productive with it.
Yeah.
It's difficult to observe any learning, and then you have controlling, especially individual actions, kind of spot cleaning. This kid do this and this kid do that, and I guess it comes down to what Jodi said earlier, of not the quote that you guys used, of not if you only understand football, you don't understand football, and you can't separate the football from the person.
No.
So the person on one side of the profile that what Jodi mentions, 200 games a year, and they have an idea of all of these different principles and concepts of the game, but maybe over constrains, over instructs the environment. How do we help them develop a better understanding of people, and the one that understands the pedagogy side? Do we help them have a better understanding of football and kind of blend those two?
Yeah, I'm really good.
I'm just curious, Mark, to Jodi's own question, which one would you side with if you had a choice? If you had to choose one.
The thing is, I wouldn't choose. I'd work with both because I think it'd be a great learning experience for me to work with both.
That's the right answer.
Yeah.
Do I win a prize?
Yeah, that was option C. Yeah.
So that's my answer, and I'm sticking with that.
Jodi?
No, I mean, yeah, I cannot choose because I think it's context dependent. And for example,
Yes.
Before you were talking about what kind of coaches you need, and if the coach is doing this, or if he's yelling, or if he's doing things in a certain way, and as the same way that we consider that the actions or the interactions of the players cannot be evaluated or cannot be considered in any sort of level if you don't understand the whole context, on why it's happening, how is that player in which moment of the game. I think it's the same with the coach behavior. Like someone who is yelling, almost all of us could agree, man, he's yelling, this coach is nuts, or it's crazy, or he's just losing his mind. But if you understand yelling in a certain context, for example, in Spain, in which how passionate people are, how parents behave, how the players are used to respond to their coaches, and how those players are not used to a good or well-mannered education in certain sections, or in certain areas, like you might even consider it, it's normal, like obviously we are people from outside and we can see it and say, hey, there's something to optimize here. But that emergent behavior of the coach yelling at that moment is just, it's normal. it's normal because the context is inviting him to do that, like it has been something that is always happening, is what he sees, is what the game is demanding, is what in his perception, because his mental model at that moment is, I'm perceiving that this is what needs to be done, right? So I don't know if he's actually the one to be blamed, or it's more the overall situation that makes things happen like that. But I also have been in that other side in which there's a misunderstanding of this type of methodology or this type of pedagogy towards the player, in which is non-intervention. And what they have to understand is that intervention is in many levels. So I like more, just answering the question, I like more that person who has that knowledge or that experience. But when I talk about experience and knowledge, I'm not talking about the conceptual map of a game model. I'm talking about he has this intuition. He knows what needs to be done, what change can be making a great change in the whole dynamics, which player has to stay a bit longer, which player should not stay that long, what can I move in this design so a new behavior emerges. That coach, if you educate him well or you convince him to change a little bit the way that he approaches the session, but has all these tools, he has all this variability of tools to create changes. I think that's a very interesting one. Whereas the other one, as I said, like sometimes stay stuck, and it's not a problem because he's just stuck because of inexperience. He starts coaching, he has a lot of information around him, so he freezes, and because the methodology says, oh, you don't have to say the answers, you don't have to say the coaching cues, you just have to observe and wait. His first action is, I'm not saying anything. And then sometimes you feel desperate because you're saying, man, there's something so clear that you could change, and you will help the players. And it's always to help the players. It's not about achieving an outcome. It's about helping the players, because you can tell that feeling when the players need this help. So as you were saying, I don't know if it was written, like the human part, I think that we cannot separate knowledge of the game with knowledge of the player. And I think that the coach that has more experience have this intuition about what each player needs, what the team needs, so this runs, and it's not based on a model, it's not based on behaviors, it's just based on experience and knowing how to touch these little pieces that makes a big change in the whole system.
Yeah. Good. Really good. Anything else before we wrap up, fellas?
Thank you so much. That was a super great, valuable conversation.
Yeah.
No, thanks for the invite. I've enjoyed a lot, and anytime you want, I'm happy to discuss about other stuff. So
you have time, eh?
Yeah, now I have time. Unfortunately, I have time.
Yeah. Mark, anything from you, buddy?
No, this is great. It's just really good to get to discuss some stuff that's been on my mind, and some stuff that I'm trying to work with and implement, and just get different inputs, different angles, different questions for myself, leaving with better questions, which is great. Good.
Well, hopefully other people will get something from this as well. I'll probably post this at some point today, folks. And if you want to do it again next week, let's do it.
Cool. Thank you, Britton. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Great to meet you, Jodi.
Bye.
Thanks, Mike.